And that leads to a skeptical hypothesis, where you have these are some of the leading skeptics over the years: Donald Menzel, Philip J. Klass, Carl Sagan, Neil deGrasse Tyson. You have a large school of body in a large school of thought, a large school in the mainstream that says, look, this whole thing is a big mistake. All of the UFO evidence is just mistaken. We've heard this all many, many times. The witnesses are delusional or they're hoaxing, which happens, of course. We know this happens. And then you hear the refrain. We've heard this now for generations. We've heard this for a whole human lifetime, that interstellar flight is really not possible. And you'll hear astronomers frequently saying things like, you people don't really understand just how difficult it is, how vast the distance between the stars is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we've all heard this a million times. My answer to that, by the way, is, well, that sounds great, but what do I do with these reports? Do I just pretend that they don't exist? I mean, something's going on here. But in reality, I'll come up to the problem of that hypothesis in a moment. But, they'll talk about the distance, our understanding of space-based technology didn't really seem to give us the opportunity or much of a chance to make it to another star based on the technology that we are using currently. Not a very logical way to think about it when you really sit and reflect. I mean, who's going to assume that if you're talking about the impossibility of space travel in 1965, that the world's going to stay like 1965 forever, obviously. One interesting objection to the ETH, though, is in this statement here, the probable brevity of advanced civilizations. And it's an interesting thought to consider, which essentially is, look at our own civilization. All right, we haven't really been around here that long. We developed writing about 6,000 years ago. Not that long. And in that time, and we kind of trudged along with wooden implements and beasts of burden, and then suddenly 150 years ago we get science and we're like shooting right up. We're a very unstable civilization when you think about it, and the question arises among a lot of thoughtful people is we may not really be here very long. And if we're not here very long, is this the kind of norm? Are we going to destroy ourselves before we really get an opportunity to get out into space? And there are a lot of people who think maybe that's the case. Maybe advanced civilizations are just too unstable. So all of these objections and more to the idea of an ETH. You have other hypotheses as well to try to explain UFOs. This is another one, kind of skeptical, not quite as skeptical as the previous hypothesis, the psychosocial hypothesis, basically saying that the human mind creates this phenomenon in some way. They're not necessarily saying there are no unexplained phenomena, but I think in general, this school of thought would argue that what we're experiencing is in large part kind of a creation of our mind. And it's a phenomenon that conforms to cultural and psychological expectations. That's my language, but I think that characterizes them pretty accurately. And if you look at, this is an image of the Nuremberg woodcut from the 16th century. In fact, Linda mentioned this in her lecture last night. This is a drawing from the 18th century of an object over London. Very interesting sighting. It was written about in a journal called Philosophical Transactions. This is can't really see this too well, an image of the airships from the 1890s. This is a 1950-ish flying saucer, and this is something that was photographed in the last decade or so. And so you can really see, they do kind of look a little different. And that's just one way in which a psychosocial explanation would try to say, well, look, you're seeing this phenomenon evolve over the course of human history. Maybe that's more of a reflection of the quality of the mind of the percipient rather than the object itself. And again, this is, whether we agree or do not agree with this is one significant school of thought that is out there in the world today, to this very day. And then you get some stranger hypotheses, which I think are real more exciting to a lot of the folks who study this. The interdimensional hypothesis. I was, a couple of months ago, I was in the Bay Area, and I got to have a dinner with Jacques Vallée, which was really nice. And so, of course, we did the ubiquitous photograph, how to do that. And I put it on my, I have an Instagram, I don't even know what I do with it. Put it on there and then on Facebook. And some guy wrote, cool, the ETH meets the IDH. And I was like, what is that? Oh, right, I get it. So Jacques Vallée, the kind of representative of the interdimensional hypothesis, and this guy said that I was the ETH guy. I thought, wow, really? I suppose. But the idea of an interdimensional hypothesis, of course, that these are somehow interdimensional entities, whatever that even is. I mean, it's really easy for us to talk about other dimensions. I'm going to talk about this a little more in a moment, but I just would like to stop and reflect that I don't know if our brains can really, truly understand what another dimension even is, because I don't really think we're set up for that. But the idea that they are from some other dimension of reality is a very attractive one. It's a very widespread one. And I'm sure many of you in the room here are believers, or at least you entertain the idea. One element of that is that these entities might themselves be conducting their own psychological operation. It was an idea of Vallée's that I think is a very interesting one. One of the things supporting is that you've got, thousands of sightings every year. Are these beings still surveilling the Earth? What the hell are they doing? Honestly, if you go online today to the National UFO Reporting Center and to the MUFON website, and I've said this many, many times, in fact, this was put into the first episode of the reboot of the X-Files. I do believe Chris Carter caught this from one of my lectures. He was at one of my lectures when he was doing it in San Mateo a couple of years ago. Anyway, we have 10,000 plus UFO sightings in North America alone every year. And I'm not saying that they're all alien craft or interdimensional craft. I mean, a lot of them are mistaken identity cases, but there's a lot that's going on. And if you go through some of these descriptions, they are rather interesting indeed. So the question is, if you've had all of these sightings every year, what is a potential extraterrestrial civilization really doing with all of these sightings? I mean, are they really from another planet and they're just flying all over our planet? It seems a little odd to some people who stop and think about this. And again, we get to the whole idea of this phenomenon just being too strange, and the idea of, as Vallée wrote years ago, maybe the ancient concept of fairies does seem to have a lot in common with our contemporary descriptions of alleged alien beings. There does seem food for thought that there's a connection there. You have John Keel, also back in the 60s and 70s, talking about ultra-terrestrials. His own research was leading him to think that there are entities that could come in and out of our dimension as well. So that's part of it.